Okay, hello. So I just want to talk a little bit about why I have been listening to the Jordan Peterson Dennis Prager interview so many times recently. I think it's got about 710,000 views as of today, something like that. I must be at least 10 of those views just on my own. You might sort of say, why watch something so many times? It's a bit ridiculous, a bit of a waste of time. It's actually 50 minutes long as well, so when you work it out, it's kind of like quite a long amount of time that I've been listening to it. But it really kind of speaks to me. I just want to sort of explain why from a sort of personal development point of view, if that's okay. So I'm just going to start off. So when I went to university, I was 22, 23. I'm 39 nearly now. And so I was a few years older than kind of normal in UK. Like normally people go straight from school. Quite often people go straight from school at 18 years old. So I had a few years of just kind of working crappy jobs for a little while, just sort of messing around and just kind of, didn't really want to rush into it. So did a few things first and then went to uni. I studied English Lit with media studies, which some people might say was a bit Mickey Mouse, but I really enjoyed it. It opened my mind in lots of different ways. A lot of sort of social science and things like that. A lot of postmodern stuff, which Jordan Peterson talks about a lot. And one lecture kind of sticks out or stands out in my mind and kind of has done even more so since I've been listening to Jordan Peterson and kind of on my personal development journey. There was a lecturer we were talking about. We got onto the subject of God and religion, and I remember her saying, she basically said something on the lines of, "Well, we're all educated. We're all at university doing a degree. So we obviously don't believe in God." And I remember looking around the room, and there was quite a few people older than me who were quite well read and quite pompous and quite confident and things. And they were sort of nodding, "Oh yes, 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 of course," sort of laughing along. And I remember just sort of sitting there and thinking, I might only be 22, 23. I'm quite young, quite naive yet. But that doesn't really sit right with me somehow. I've read enough, I've spoken to enough people, I've experienced enough to know that there are some very intelligent people who choose to have faith, who choose to follow religion and what have you. And, as a 22, 23-year-old, I wasn't devout in any way. I had my own kind of very personal opinions on those things. But to hear someone say that with that arrogance, to say, we're intelligent, we're educated, so we know there's no such thing as God. What? Sorry, hang on a minute. How dare you kind of speak that way when you're trying to sort of educate people? It's just kind of like really closed-minded, arrogant attitude, and that really kind of made me think, hang on a minute. I can still learn from this, but I'm going to be quite wary now going sort of forward. And I was, and I think she did me a bit of a favour kind of saying that, because it kind of just opened my mind even more. So Jordan Peterson, in this interview of Dennis Prager, it feels a little bit, if I'm being critical, it feels a little bit like an ego massage in a way, because Dennis Prager clearly absolutely loves Jordan Peterson. He's saying how wonderful he is, how good he is and stuff. But I didn't mind that, because I've seen loads of stuff with Jordan Peterson. I've read his books. I've read 12 Rules for Life. I'm currently reading the Gulag Archipelago, which is something that he recommends. That's quite hard work, but I will talk about that at some point. I don't want to say I'll do a review because it seems a bit strange to review that book, but I will talk about it at least. And I've completely lost track as to where I was. So yeah, the Jordan Peterson Dennis Prager interview feels a bit like an ego massage, but I think because I've read so much and listened to so much from Jordan Peterson that it didn't bother me. I think it's quite nice to have a bit of positivity because he gets quite a lot of stick, and he even says he's no victim. He's had journalists who've been very good to him. He does get quite a lot of stick. Some people think that he's a really hated person, and he says in the interview that he's not at all. That's just couldn't be further from the truth. He has lots of people coming up to him and thanking him for his advice and things, and that's great. So, at one point, he talks about the fact that people keep asking him, does he believe in God? And he says he's going to release a podcast because he was in Australia and they kept asking him. And he says that he just doesn't like that question because I suppose, from my point of view, that question just feels a bit like, well, what do you mean by believe in God? what's your opinion on God? Do you have a kind of childlike image of God, that he's kind of this weird man living in the sky with a big white beard and a booming voice, or have you read lots of stuff and experienced lots of things, and do you have quite a deep kind of opinion on things, or what? So it's a bit of a weird question to begin with, but he sort of says that he always says that he tries to live as if and act as if God exists. He doesn't say I do or I don't. He says I try to act as if he does exist. And he goes on to talk about why that's important to him and why he thinks that could be good for most people, if not everyone. And he basically sort of says, to say you believe in God is an easy thing to do. It's easy to say, yes, I believe in God. But actually, if you, from a Christian point of view, if you actually want to believe in God, you have to act. It's not enough to say it. You have to actually act it out. And to act that out and to actually live in the way that you do properly believe in God is a really, really difficult thing to do. He's always talking about the dark side of humanity, humankind. He's always talking about that, the fact that we've all got the potential for darkness within us, and most of us deny that. We talk about kind of the Nazis and things as if that would never be us kind of thing. We'd either be the victim or don't ever consider ourselves to be the perpetrator or the nasty person. Well, actually, we all have the potential for nastiness within us. And most people won't agree with that. But he talks about this quite naive thing that people think that a lot of people believe that people are basically good, and it's like, no, actually, it's quite difficult to be good. It's quite difficult to keep check of yourself and to make sure you're being good. In the sense that we live in a world that makes it very easy to kid ourselves that we're doing the right thing all the time. You might think you're a good person because you go to work and you bring your children up and you put food on the table, but actually there are so many other things you could be doing while there are homeless people outside your door, people suffering, people living in hell that you're not doing anything about. If you actually think about it, we're nowhere near as good as we could be. And he always says we operate somewhere around 50, 60%, maybe 40, 30. Most of us don't operate anywhere near our full potential. And he goes on to talk about the fact that we risk damaging society, the world, by not fulfilling our potential, because every one of us who fulfills our potential and becomes as good as possible, cumulatively, he says we don't know how to measure the difference, the positive difference that could make. And so he's talking about the fact that never mind whether I believe in God or not, I try to act as if he does exist. I try to be the best person I possibly can be. And actually, that's always been his message as far as I can tell. And you get these people who get annoyed with him, and you see him in interviews, and you see these people looking at him, sort of scowling at him, and sort of like they're really angry. They want to do something to take him down. And he's always talking so eloquently. And most of the things he says are really difficult to argue with. And people only argue with him in a really sort of petty, childish way. And you'd have to be pretty stupid, really, to sort of listen to those arguments and think, oh, yeah, you've got him there. No. I've never heard him say anything racist or bigoted or what have you. I've never heard that. And if I had done, I'd have been put off him pretty quickly. And I think a lot of people would. Some people wouldn't. Some people probably think it was great. But I personally wouldn't be sort of championing him at all if I'd heard those sorts of things. And it's just quite dividing, but it's such a good talk. He talks about the fact that there is darkness, the Nazis, communism, Maoist China, the things that still go on today, the people who are still living in hell, in war zones, in suffering. And he says that if there is all this darkness, then hopefully, he thinks there must be the opposite. There must be light. You can't have right without wrong. You can't have left without right. You can't have dark without light. So, and this fact that people think that people are basically good is just quite naive. And actually, he says that he says that universities, what they're teaching it just lacks gratitude so severely. And gratitude is something that I always talk about, that we need to try to practice, And he says that you can't really be grateful unless you understand that the situation you're in could be so much worse. It's so easy to talk about history, to talk about the Second World War, the First World War, different things, the Spanish flu, we're now in the coronavirus, but it's so easy to pretend that we're aware of those things and that we're grateful, but actually we're not really, our psyche isn't really grasping how bad things could be, because every time we wake up, the roads are still working, we've still got heating, we've still got running water. So we lack this ability to actually be grateful, really, until we understand how bad things could be. And Dennis Prager is saying how he spoke to these leftist students and they basically said that they thought, people are basically good, and he's saying that's so fundamentally wrong. The only reason you can believe that is because you live in such a good country. And there is just so much truth to it, isn't there? It's like we live in this comfortable bubble compared to so many people in the world who just live in absolute shit, basically, and poverty and hell. And we have this kind of self-entitled attitude that we should have more, and that the government's terrible, and that we're so repressed. These rich people who've got so much more than us, they repress us, and we don't have enough control. And Jordan Peterson just sort of says, start with yourself before you moan about these bigger things. He quotes Churchill as well, who says how, I can't remember the quote now, but I'll put it in afterwards, about democracy being the best thing we've got. It's not great, but it's better than anything else that we've got, basically, roughly. I'll put it in afterwards. But yeah, and we don't appreciate that what we've got, although it's flawed, of course it's flawed, and Jordan Peterson says that as well, that there is inequality, and that's a problem, that we don't know how to solve that yet. There is this global warming situation that we're burning too much fuel and stuff, but you're not going to go about heating, are you? You're not going to go without charging your iPhone, are you? So stop being so self-entitled and moaning about it. Try to use your intelligence and your insight and your ability that you have, that you were lucky enough to be born with, to try to work on solving those problems rather than just moaning and kind of complaining. And so it's this dark versus light, and he's talking. I think he's got probably quite strong faith, and I don't think that either takes away or adds necessarily to his argument. I just think it's really interesting, and I just think if you are someone who has faith, then brilliant, use it to strengthen you, use it to live your life by in the best possible way. If you're someone who's an atheist, you're a Richard Dawkins type, be careful to be too kind of aggressive and negative towards people who have faith, because just because they have faith doesn't mean they're stupid. And just because someone's an atheist doesn't mean they're stupid either, obviously. But let's just kind of understand that actually, regardless of that, there is a better way to be as a person. Take personal responsibility, work on yourself, work on being able to get up on time, doing the basics, going to work, volunteering, paying your own way, standing on your own 2 feet, not taking off the state, not expecting the state to pay for you, not blaming the government, not blaming people all the time. Take personal responsibility, do the best you can do to be the best version of yourself, work on yourself, accept that you're not invincible, you're going to die one day, but actually, try to live life where you're not going to have any regrets when you look back. And I just think the stuff that he says is really good, and when you hear it, it just seems quite obvious, really. And you get these critics who kind of say, and I've heard, because he's been ill recently, and I've heard people say, I think an actual medical doctor tweeted something along the lines of, haha, Jordan Peterson, how do you like it now, or something, because they see him as unsympathetic. He's not unsympathetic, he's very sympathetic. He just doesn't agree with this whole kind of group mentality, ignore the individual, you can't say anything without risking offending someone. Freedom of speech is actually really important, and if we say it's not important, we let it go, then there's a real slippery slope there, and that's been proven in history. Why don't we learn from history? It's just ridiculous. But I've been waffling on for ages now, and I could waffle on for another flipping 15 minutes, so I'll stop now. But this interview, Dennis Prager, Jordan Peterson, there's another one, Skavlan, the Norwegian talk show, where he's talking. He talks about divorce and stuff, and that's really interesting as well. I just find him really entertaining to listen to. He's really, I'm not saying that every single thing he says in every way is, and I have my suspicions there that if I actually spoke to him over a beer, or not over a beer, over a cup of tea, whatever, for a long enough period of time, there might be the odd thing that I did kind of disagree with him potentially, but so what? That doesn't mean that you hate the person, or it's okay to disagree with people and have debates and try and pick things apart. So, don't know, open your mind a little bit, listen to him, listen to other people as well, challenge people, don't be too scared. He's always talking about telling the truth and how important that is as well. Tell the truth. If you make a mistake, you can learn from it. But anyway, Jordan Peterson, Dennis Prager, I think it's one of the best things on YouTube at the minute. It's great. Give it a go.